Welcome and thank you for watching today. I'm speaking with Mr. Scott Anderson, Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator and Director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza. In this interview, we will explore the humanitarian impact of the ongoing war on Gaza and the challenges UNRWA is facing, in addition to the efforts being made to deliver critical aid and support. Mr. Anderson, thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
My pleasure, thank you.
So you just came recently from a visit to Gaza, and this wasn't the first one, of course, running the operation in the sector. We would like to listen from you and to have an overview of the situation currently.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today. And yeah, I just came back from Gaza a few days ago. I came back out Sunday. And the week before, I'd spent some time in the northern parts of Gaza, including Bet Tanoun, Jabalia, Bet Lakia, where the UN has not been able to get very easily. So I've really had a view of everything in Gaza, and what you see really is a lot of destruction. 2/3 of the buildings are destroyed or damaged to the point that people shouldn't be living in them. It's winter, so it's cold, it's wet. People are just trying to find a way to stay warm, stay dry, and find food every day. So it's very much it's a terrible situation for the people that are living there, that are caught in this horrible conflict. And we very much hope that it would end very soon. Rumors of a ceasefire are very welcome. Hopefully they become true. But it's almost hard to describe the scale of destruction. And you see it every day when you drive around Gaza as we deliver aid. Buildings destroyed, you have children looking through garbage. I mean, it's a very difficult situation for everyone.
The word catastrophic is what we've been hearing a lot, and this is the word that has been used to describe the situation, whether we talk about education, whether we talk about the humanitarian aspects, whether we talk about the infrastructure, and talking about the people themselves. And now we're leaning towards something that is beyond catastrophic. If we talk about the main elements that were destroyed, adding to all what you've mentioned, what would be the priority?
I mean, for me, the priority first is food for people. I mean, we have a lot of people that are hungry in Gaza, 2 million people that are completely reliant on aid from the international community for their daily survival. The healthcare system is just about completely destroyed. Hospitals are mostly hospitals in name only. They very much do just basic wound care, basic pain management. Generation of water is very important. And all this relies on us bringing aid into Gaza, which has been somewhat difficult in the most recent period. So the number one priority for us is getting aid in so we can take care of people, and then making sure everybody has food, water, shelter, and health care.
Yes, and mentioning the health sector, we talk about the hospitals as you referred. It's not only about what the hospitals are receiving, but about the staff themselves, the overwhelmed staff by the lack of medicine, the lack of assistance, the lack of the staff, and being targeted sometimes by the conflict or by the ongoing war. So this is a hard situation where they need to manage between managing the hospitals and the healthcare in general, and also keep accepting people according to the available capacities.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. I was in Kamal Adwan Hospital in the north, which is a pediatric hospital. So all the doctors are pediatricians, and now they're treating trauma patients. And that's a whole different kind of training. And you see that replicated across Gaza. Dealing with trauma or, shrapnel, bullet wounds, these kind of things, it takes special training, special expertise. And not every doctor has gone through that training. So you have people doing things they were never trained to do, which puts them in a very difficult position. They don't have enough equipment to do everything correctly. So they're tired and they're frustrated because they have the training in many cases and they don't have the materials, the supplies, and the support they need so they can treat people in a way they should be treated.
The emergency response label is really tracing everything in Gaza. And when we talk about hospitals in particular, it's not only about that, but sometimes most of the hospitals has been out of service because of the lack of electricity. And this is a main issue and a main element for the functionality of those hospitals.
That's true. It's very true. I mean, there is no electricity in Gaza that doesn't come from a generator. And generators require diesel, of course. So the UN brings in diesel, and it's very much the lifeblood of the response. Everything starts with the diesel, the hospital generators, they can produce oxygen, and the operating theaters can work. The bakeries that produce bread for people, everything, water generation starts with diesel because there is no other options for electricity. There is one small caveat. There is an electric line connected from Israel to the desalination plant in the south, but that's it. Otherwise, all electricity is generated through generators on the ground. And they don't have spare parts, they don't get maintenance, so sometimes they fail. So it's just one more thing for doctors and hospitals to have to worry about. And if you're on a ventilator and the electricity goes out, you have to be hand ventilated. And that's a very difficult and delicate thing.
That can be done for hours.
Yes, it can be done for hours, that's correct.
Another alarming aspect towards health and the health sector is the spread of diseases. And there has been international invitations and calling to stop that, because this is something that cannot be contained, especially when it comes to children.
Yeah, it's very difficult, again, for children. Polio has been confirmed in Gaza, the first cases in, well, as long as doctors could remember. So we were able to do a polio campaign, UNRWA, WHO, UNICEF, and the Ministry of Health, and I think we reached about 95% of the children. So for this year, that's good. We'll have to do it again next year. We also know hepatitis is present, upper respiratory disease, E. coli. I've had E. coli myself twice living in Gaza. So it is very difficult, and primary health care is really the first line of defense. Now, and UNRWA alone does 16,000 primary care medical consultations a day. And without that primary care being the first defense for people, we could face a situation that's much more dangerous, especially for children. And because people live so closely together in tents, makeshift plastic structures, that disease could spread very quickly. And we've seen that with skin disease as well.
This is also a challenge that we've been seeing, especially when it comes to skin diseases, and there is a lack of any kind of personal hygiene elements, that's like the basic soaps. So people did not manage even to have separate bathrooms, and the services are not there. So basically, this is something is almost impossible to deal with.
I mean, skin disease is actually very easy to treat. You shower, use soap, and you put ointment on afterwards, and that generally will take care of it in a day or two. But if you don't have access to a shower, you don't have access to enough soap, and you don't have access to the ointment, it makes it very uncomfortable. And you see children that have these things, and they're suffering needlessly, because it's something that could be treated actually very quickly, very easily, but we just don't have enough of everything that's needed to produce a healthier environment for people to live in.
When we talk about all these joined elements, the infrastructure, the humanitarian aspects, and basically the health issue, it all leads to one question, really trying to imagine the psychological toll on Gaza's population, especially when we talk about children, like you mentioned, and when we talk about long-time mental health effects. People have been talking about this a lot, and really there is no one who can anticipate or expect how this would look like and the reflection of it over years.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, I remember I was in Gaza previously, and during the war in 2014, we talked about trauma that people faced, and that was much different than what we're facing today. I think everybody in Gaza is traumatized in some way. There's just degrees of severity around the trauma, and you're correct, we don't know how that will manifest or when it will manifest. And it's important as we try to get children back to education that the teachers receive some help so they're not traumatized or not as traumatized as they try to deal with children that are traumatized. Generally for children, when they're traumatized, they act out. They act out violently or just to get attention, and to be able to take care of that.
It's shown in their behavior.
Yeah, it's just, and it's normal for children to act that way. But it's very hard if the teacher themselves are traumatized to help the child that's also traumatized. So there's a lot of work to do to rebuild Gaza, the infrastructure, but the human development recovery will take much longer. A lot more dedicated resources, a lot more specialized skills, and it's something that it's hard to predict when somebody is better. You know when a building's done, you can see it, and it can be inspected, and you can say, okay, it's done, we can move on. But trauma can sometimes take a lifetime to treat. So it's a long road for many people to try to restore themselves to a mentality that's healthy.
Yeah. It's a long road, and maybe it reveals the level of complexity that we are having in this issue, because sometimes the focus goes about ceasing fire and then providing the priorities when it comes to food, services, and everything related to basic human life. But when we talk about the implications and the reflections, this is another important phase that everyone has been also pointing to, especially when it comes to international organizations, the after work and the recovery that needs to be done side by side other than just the basic aid.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the human development recovery, as I said, is something that will take time. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take different resources than we currently have as we respond to the emergency. And most of those resources don't exist within Gaza. They're going to have to come from outside. Because you need psychiatrists, psychologists that can help people work through the trauma especially the children, because that's also a different type of expertise. But it has to be done hand in hand with the infrastructure rebuild and everything else that has to happen in Gaza.
You mentioned as a priority when we started talking the food and the food delivery, and this is, of course, a basic human need. So when we talk about that aspect, how would we describe the situation when it comes to the people there? I mean, there are many words to describe what's happening. We use starvation, we talk about hunger, we talk about restrictions, but from what you're seeing and observing, what is the situation in that aspect in particular? And when we talk about malnutrition, especially for children?
Yeah, I mean, the UN uses what they call the integrated phase classification report to identify levels of hunger, levels of famine. I mean, all in Gaza, and it goes 1 being the best, 5 being the worst, the different phases. Everybody's in phase 3, some are in phase 4, and we think some may be even in phase 5, but we're not certain because it's imprecise science. And I myself, I've never worked somewhere where famine was a possibility. So I don't know as much about it, but I do know when people are hungry because they will tell you they're hungry when you're out and you talk to them, and we know we're not bringing enough food in. The resilience people have is quite good in Gaza, but for children it's different, right? And the effects of not having enough food when you're younger are lifelong. Severe malnutrition or acute malnutrition impacts children's ability to reach their full human potential, and that's something that's very concerning for us. So we do a lot of work, all the UN does together, WHO, WFP, UNICEF, UNRWA, to try to get extra nutritional supplements to children so that they don't suffer the impacts of not having enough food. It's been very, I find it very frustrating. Between UNRWA and the World Food Program, we have 100,000 metric tons of food waiting to come into Gaza. That's enough for everybody for 3 months. And then there's more that could be procured and be on the way. But we've just had challenges inside Gaza, getting things in safely to our warehouses so we can then distribute it to people that are very much in need and are very hungry.
And this really leads to talk about the challenges that you've been facing. I mean, you already mentioned a couple, but when we talk about delivering the food, especially while you're looking at quantities that are waiting just for the people who are waiting and just not getting enough nutrition, especially when we talk about younger ages, we talk about infants, we talk about really months old who doesn't even get milk to have. So, I mean, how do you function, the teams really working in that war zone?
I mean, it's very difficult, and the teams that are doing all this work are displaced themselves. They're also living in tents. They're also living in makeshift plastic structures, and they, to me, they're quite remarkable and really the unsung heroes of what's happening in Gaza. Despite the circumstances in which they find themselves, they come to work every day with a positive attitude, and they want to try to help people. I used to say to the team in Gaza, we're not going to help everybody today, but we can help somebody today, and they've sort of adopted that ethos. But they're also frustrated because they could do more if we could just get more aid in so that we can then do the job we know how to do very well.
And when you talk about the workers of UNRWA, like you just highlighted, they are people from Gaza as well. So they are having the same impact of the circumstances that are surrounding them. And when we talk about the risk aspect while they are doing their jobs.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not safe in Gaza anywhere. We know that. There's been over 250 UNRWA colleagues that have lost their lives and over 300 humanitarians that have lost their lives in the conflict. And the thing that our workers have that not everybody else does, they leave their families and come to work. So they have kind of a split focus, I call it. They're focused on the job, focused on trying to help, and they want to help their community get through this difficult time, but they're also worried about their family. Yeah. And will their family be there when they get home? Will something happen to them? How much food do they have for their own families? So it's incredibly difficult for them, but they manage to stay focused and they do incredible work in incredibly difficult circumstances.
Some would say that the functionality of the work of UNRWA on the field is becoming or decreasing more and more because of the situation, and some would think that there is no work at all. So how would you describe the flow of the functionality of operation, considering the situation that is changing? Sometimes it's very, very hard, and sometimes it's I can't even say low risk, but there is sometimes where, like you said, you can deliver to some of the people.
You can deliver to some. I mean, UNRWA is a very unique organization. Before October 7th, we were focused on human development. So you have over 300,000 children in school, and you run the health clinics, and it's all about helping people reach their human potential. Then when the war started, our approach changed and we went into emergency response mode. And we still do primary health care. We still, we do all the food, we do water generation, we pick up trash, we bring in fuel for everyone else to use, we do logistics. But the one thing that did fall by the wayside is education, because all the school buildings become designated emergency shelters for people that are trying to find some level of safety for themselves, for their families, and there's just nowhere to educate children. Now we have started a learning program to try to give children just basic education, basic numeracy, basic literacy, as well as some psychosocial support, trying to create a safe space so children can just be children. But we have 8,000 teachers, give or take, that are employed by UNRWA, and not all of them are working because there's not work for them to do. So this is one of my concerns for people in Gaza, is not creating a lost generation educationally. So we have to find a way to find space so we can get children back to learning so they don't forget how to learn, but also so they can feel, like I said, a little bit safe and find a little bit of routine.
Even if we had a ceasefire now, we're talking about the damage and the destruction that really reached even the facilities of UNRWA, mainly schools. So in that regard, could you please just elaborate further of the damage level that has been done so far?
Yeah, I mean, across Gaza, 2/3 of buildings are destroyed or damaged, and UNRWA's facilities are no different. We're part of that. We have some schools that are damaged, some schools that have been completely destroyed, as well as other facilities that we just can't access because of the way the conflict has evolved. So, as Gaza looks to rebuild, all those schools, the health centers, that has to be part of the plan to rebuild. But we're talking, years, if not a decade, to get everything done, because in all those buildings, there's potentially unexploded ordnance, there's potentially remains of people, so you have to be slow and methodical as you go through trying to clear the rubble, so nobody gets hurt from unexploded ordnance, but also anybody that's there can have a dignified burial.
We understand that UNRWA always seeks partnerships and tries to work in collaboration with its international partners. And when we mention countries, we highlight Jordan and the logistical and the level of partnership in regards aid to Gaza on different levels. How would you describe that?
I've been in the region since 2008, and Jordan has been a great partner of UNRWA and a great partner of Gaza throughout the entirety of the time that I've been here. And this conflict is no different. I recall in 2014, the Hashemite charity organization and the pipeline from Jordan were very critical to the way we responded, and that's very similar today. The King has been very involved throughout the conflict. We've seen food come in, and the stuff that comes from Jordan is one of the main pipelines for us, especially to the northern part of Gaza right now. So we're very thankful for the partnership that we have with the Kingdom of Jordan. And they make our job easier than it would be if they weren't present. And they help in many ways that are not just material aid, but with access. There's 2 field hospitals in Gaza that people don't hear about often, so they are treating patients, and they've just been an exemplary partner throughout all this conflict.
Yes. We describe Jordan sometimes as the eye of the hurricane, and we are in the heart of the Middle East, where we have these hard situations surrounding us. But there is a unique relationship between the Jordanian and the Palestinian people, and as you said, His Majesty is always calling for the rights of the Palestinians. So when this is a side of the aid that continues not only during the war, but we talk also after, as we hope for a ceasefire later on, which requires much more logistical arrangement and much more kind of support.
Yeah, certainly. After a ceasefire, the work will only increase. It won't reduce. We hope that we're going to bring in a lot more aid. People are going to want to go home to their houses. So there will be a population on the move. And I expect that Jordan will remain a very viable pipeline. The corridor is very important as we move into a possible ceasefire. Where the needs will only increase, because then again, as I said about education, we hope to get education restarted. So that will need support, school uniforms, books, all these kind of things. And I know we can count on Jordan, as we have in the past, to continue to support the people of Gaza.
An observation from someone who's been to Gaza a lot, and you just came recently, as we highlighted before, it's very important to just communicate the sense of what's happening there. And even as we talked previously, even if the war stops, we're talking about a process of rebuilding Gaza that's not going to be easy, not mentioning the destruction. We're talking about reviving all the sectors. So how do you see that according to what you've been living in the field of Gaza? It
almost seems like an impossible task as you see it now. there's not much of anything left, right? From private sector, the banks haven't operated for a long time, and ATMs. So you're really talking about rebuilding from the ground up. The only positive I see from that is perhaps we can be rebuilding Gaza differently and for the future, instead of the way it was, try to take advantage of opportunities for them. There's a lot of things that we can hopefully solve through a rebuild to make Gaza a more viable place for people to live in the long term. But it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a concerted effort by the international community. UNDP will lead for the UN, the World Bank, and others, and we will all play our role in supporting that. In the past, UNRWA was very much at the forefront as recovery from the conflict took place, but the scale is so great this time that we really will need all hands coming together to make the effort work in a way that's positive and planned and can help take care of everyone.
You showed us some footage from Jabalia, I think. We saw it together, and basically there was nothing left. And when we talked about removing the destruction, you highlighted that this is not an easy process as everyone would imagine, because it's not about just removing the ruins and just having a new building there. Could you elaborate more on that point?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was in Jabalia a week ago, and there were a couple things that surprised me. First, the conflict is still going on very strong. We could hear as we traveled throughout to the different hospitals and locations, there's a lot of activity, a lot of fighting still between Hamas and the IDF. The problem is there's been a lot of artillery and weapons fire in Gaza. Generally about 8 to 10% of stuff that's fired doesn't explode. So you have this in the rubble. You have unexploded ordnance in the rubble. So you're going to have to be very careful so people aren't hurt, children aren't hurt. And that takes a lot of people, a lot of expertise and time. And that's always the hardest part, is finding time for everything. And then once it's cleared, as I said, we expect there are remains there for people that will need to be buried. So it's not something that can be done quickly. You can't just take a bulldozer and shove it out of the way. It will take time to get through it, and it has to be done correctly so we don't cause further damage to people, further casualties, because we tried to rush through something that we should not.
I hope by the next time we meet, we will be talking about rebuilding Gaza and about the UNRWA, the support that UNRWA would need in that phase, hopefully. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your observations, and what you have seen on the ground from Gaza. Mr. Scott Anderson, Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator and Director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza, thank you so much.
Thank you.